in tears. So it is kind of a bittersweet time. I mean, we've looking forward to 3 more classes, but it is the end of the week. But the first class will be our brother John Pople and his leading ladies. And class 6, I'm not quite sure what we're going to have because he's left some out, but included others. So I'll leave it up to him.
Push B. Push the letter B for Birdie. There's your answer.
As I said, Mary Magdalene's Brother John.
Thanks, Peter. Yes, indeed. Good morning for one final time, sadly. Good morning. And we have, as Brother Peter said, Mary Magdalene's story for us this morning. I think an appropriate finale to draw a military metaphor, which may or may not be appropriate, but allow me some latitude. We've seen, who have we seen? We've seen Tamar and Rahab and Deborah and Jael and Jephthah's daughter and Esther in terms of those leading ladies who led towards God. And yet, in that context, somehow we've seen the lieutenants and we've seen the colonels. And today, perhaps, we meet the general. Today, we see Mary Magdalene. Let's make a start. The first question we have to answer, and it's something of a sort of an irritating one, is who is Mary Magdalene? And what I mean by that is there are so many mentions of someone called Mary in the Bible. You kind of think, which of these refers to which woman? We know there's more than one Mary, but we don't for sure know how many there are. Let me show you the problem we have. There's a maximum of 6 Marys in the Bible. There's Mary Magdalene, we know that because she's named, and that's the person we want to isolate. We want to see all of her stories. We want to see her stories. We also want to see all of her stories. So if she's some of the other Marys that are referenced in the Bible, we want to include those too. But we don't want to include them and create a composite character accidentally out of someone stealing someone else's stories. We also know there's a very important Mary, Mary the sister of Martha, the sister of Lazarus, the 3 siblings, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, who live in the village of Bethany, just outside the city limits of Jerusalem. We know that there's Mary, the mother of Jesus, and we also meet Mary, the mother of James and Joseph. We also meet Mary, the wife of Cleopas, who is the sister-in-law of Mary, the mother of Jesus. And if that wasn't complicated enough, congratulations, we also have the other Mary. That's helpful. So chaos, right? Potential chaos. We have 6 or a maximum number of 6 Marys if they're all different people, and they may well be. Could they all be one and the same person? No. We know that there's at least a minimum of 3 distinct Marys, because 3 distinct Marys show up at the foot of the cross. Standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother, whose name we know to be Mary, and his mother's sister or sister-in-law, Mary, the wife of Cleopas. So we have Mary, the mother of Jesus, is distinct from Mary, the wife of Cleopas, who's at the foot of the cross, and so is the character we're interested in, Mary Magdalene. So we have somewhere between a minimum of 3 and a maximum of 6 different Marys. If you want to get all the stories of Mary Magdalene, we have to figure out, we know she's not also the mother of Jesus or the aunt of Jesus, but she might be any one or all of these 3 as well. So it's not necessarily a great spiritual quest, but we do need to clear up that situation before we can press forward. So let's investigate these other Marys. We're going to start in the middle here with Mary, the mother of James and Joseph. Is she also one of these 3 other Marys? Just to clear up our situation. And the first thing we notice is that Jesus' brothers are also called James and Joseph. I should say half-brothers, shouldn't I? His half-brothers, he has 4 of them. They are James and Joseph and Simon and Judas. So the names of Jesus' half-brothers are also mothered by this particular Mary. So there's a potential case that Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, is Mary, the mother of Jesus. Is that enough evidence on its own to suggest the link? For my money, I say no. That's potentially just a coincidence. However, fortunately, there's even more evidence to suggest these are the same person. We have parallel Gospels, which is very useful. So we read in the Gospel of John, this is the verse we looked at earlier, at the foot of the cross, there was Jesus' mother and also the Mary we've shown in green and in red. But if we looked at that same verse in parallel Gospels, we find that Mary Magdalene is named at the foot of the cross, we knew that, as well as Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, sometimes James the younger or James the less, and Joseph, sometimes phrased as James and Joseph, very much the same things. So of course Mary, the mother of Jesus, is at the foot of the cross, but in the Gospels of both Matthew and Mark, Mary, the mother of Jesus, isn't named, but Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, is. So we now have enough evidence, I think, to reasonably confidently conclude Mary, the mother of James, the reference to Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, is the same as Mary, the mother of Jesus. In other words, she is the mother of Jesus and the half-brothers James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas. So we can put these two Marys together with reasonable confidence. Of course, you might say, well, I still have a question. Why on earth would you call Jesus' mother but as the mother of his half-brothers? If Jesus is the focus of the story, why would you take the mother of Jesus and say, well, she's the mother of his half-brothers? It's the same woman. Why would you do that? That seems confusing. And there's a possibility we can answer that question too, because the two Gospels that do it are Matthew and Mark. And Matthew and Mark are the two Gospels who bother to point out that Mary at one point, Mary the mother of Jesus, somewhat stumbled spiritually. She kind of lost her way temporarily. Jesus' mother and his brothers were standing outside, and they felt that because they had a blood link to Jesus, they had priority access. And the crowd told them, hey, your mother and your brothers are outside, and they're demanding your attention. But Jesus said, who are my mother and my brothers? And looking at those who sat around him and listened to his word, he said, these are my mother and brothers. So at this point, Mary had kind of not kept up with Jesus spiritually. Jesus' physical mother and brothers struggled to stay with Jesus spiritually. And so I see then that both Matthew and Mark, who record this event, they then sort of default to starting calling Mary not the mother of Jesus, but the mother of his brothers, as she kind of falls away a bit spiritually. She comes back very strongly at the end and into the book of Acts, without a doubt. But that's, I think, why Mary, the mother of Jesus, is occasionally called Mary, the mother of Jesus' brothers. Okay, let's move on and have a look at the other Mary. And here, as well as solving logistical necessities, we do stumble across a small spiritual jewel. At the burial, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were there, sitting opposite the tomb. Okay, so we know the other Mary isn't Mary Magdalene. That's useful. Again, parallel Gospels help identify her further. It's actually Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, who sat at the tomb. So we now know the other Mary, in this context of Matthew 27, is in fact the mother of Jesus. Those are the two Marys at the tomb. So the other Mary, as referenced in Matthew, is also Mary, the mother of Jesus. We can put those together, okay? Now, the fascinating thing is this. The mother of Jesus is presented as the other Mary to Mary Magdalene, not the other way around. Do you see the importance of that? The important Mary is Mary Magdalene. Two Marys come into the room, and it's like, there's Mary Magdalene, oh, and another Mary. And the other Mary is his mother. Now that's quite shocking, because usually we expect Mary, the mother of Jesus, to take precedence in any listing. And if you've been raised at all or have familiarity with the Catholic faith, that is elevated, beyond even that which is reasonable to some extent, okay? But the Bible actually says, no, Mary Magdalene is the one we want to focus on. There's another Mary here, that happens to be his mother. She is the lesser. That's the fascinating thing. My father always struggled with the same thing, to my great amusement, because people would meet my father and say, oh, are you John Pople's father? And he would say, no. I said, no, I'm not. He is my son. But we enjoyed fighting about that for a long time. Anyway, so Mary Magdalene is presented as the superior Mary, superior even to the mother of Jesus. That's our little spiritual discovery in that verse. So that's kind of a nice find. We're still left with the biggest question of all, aren't we? There are these two, or one or two, incredibly important characters in Jesus' life. Mary Magdalene is incredibly important, and Mary, the sister of Martha, is incredibly important. Are they one and the same Mary, or are they two different characters? That's going to be our biggest question of all. And first of all, to say Mary Magdalene, Magdalene is a word that's been played with a great deal. Magdala can mean tower, so often it's called Mary the Tower, and people reference her as Mary, the one with towering faith. Magdalene's also been interpreted in a number of different ways, but I think that the preponderance of translators, and therefore myself with them, take it most simply that it means of the city of Magdala, which is on the shores of the Lake Galilee up in the north of the country. How are we going to answer this question? Because the clues on the ground are, or at least the definitive clues, are simply not there. So here's what I'm going to do, I'm going to suggest is the best way. This is the best science we can do, is say, let's just run with both theories. Let's say they're two different Marys and make the biggest and best case we can for that, and then say, no, they're one and the same Mary, and make the biggest, best case for that, and hopefully one of those cases will be a lot more compelling than the other. And fortunately, that's, I think, what happens. Let's then make the case for two Marys, that Mary, sister of Martha and Lazarus, is a different person from Mary Magdalene. What evidence do we have to support that hypothesis? Well, the obvious, geography. We know that Mary, the sister of Martha and Lazarus, live in Bethany, which is a village near Jerusalem. It's a name, the name means house of the poor or house of misery. An earlier translation of house of dates has been later debunked. So we're talking house of the poor, house of misery. That's their home. Mary Magdalene, logic suggests, comes from Magdala in Galilee. Galilee's in the north of the country. Jerusalem is in the south of the country. So they're quite distinctly separate. And we do know that Mary Magdalene traveled from Galilee, her home, to support Jesus and followed him to Jerusalem to support him in his ministry. In all cases, I'm going to give the references, but we don't have time to turn them up. Also, there are very different financial status. If Mary of Bethany lives in a place called House of the Poor, logically, she is herself poor. And that's a reasonable case. But we know for a fact that Mary Magdalene is not poor, because she is one of a band of women, in fact she's the leader, who put together a band of women who supported Jesus' ministry, emotionally and spiritually, but also logistically and financially. She bankrolled the travel, the accommodation costs or whatever to support Jesus traveling from place to place. So they're very different geographically, they come from different places, and they have a very different financial status. That said, the geographical argument may seem to be somewhat conclusive, but then I look at myself and I think, well, I ask myself, where am I from? And the answer is, I'm from 2,500 miles away. You go 2,500 miles east, and that's where I grew up for the first 25 years of my life. But if you go 2,500 miles west, that's where I've lived for the last 25 years. So where am I from? You could easily say I'm from England. My voice betrays that fact even if I try and hide it. Or you could say I'm from San Francisco. Both are true. I'm from two different places. So the idea that someone is the same person can be from two different places is hardly a problem. Let's now make the case for one Mary. And what I've done here is I've identified, I think there's 10, all 10 times that Jesus meets Mary, one of these two Marys. And I've kept them separate as two Marys for now, and I've just noticed before the ministry starts in Galilee, during the 3-year ministry, and then after the ministry, and that's really the crucifixion and resurrection, Jesus interacts with one or other of these Marys. And those are all 10 occasions. And what I'm going to do is talk through this story as if they're two different Marys and end up concluding this does not make any sense. Jesus meets Mary Magdalene in Galilee. Why? Because that's where his ministry started. Nazareth is up in the north of the country, so is Magdala. So he meets her there. She is transformed by meeting Jesus. And she's clearly dedicated her whole life thereafter to following Jesus every step of the way. They both go down to Jerusalem because Jesus knows his ministry must be presented in Jerusalem, the apple of his Father's eye. Now, the two different characters. The moment Mary Magdalene touches down in Jerusalem, she disappears. She's gone for 3 years. She never shows up anywhere in Jesus' ministry. This woman who's been transformed by Jesus suddenly takes off on a 3-year shopping spree in the capital city or something. She's just nowhere near Jesus. Magically, the moment she disappears, another lady called Mary magically appears and is instantly dedicated to Jesus. She sits and listens faithfully at his feet. In fact, she's the only human on earth that Jesus ever called for, because when Jesus was distressed at the loss of Lazarus, he called for the presence of Mary. She is the reason that Jesus wept. That shortest verse in the Bible, Jesus wept, is because of Mary. You might think it's because Lazarus died. That's not correct. We'll look at that in just a minute. She is the one who anoints him for his death. She's the only one who listened and understood what he was saying about the necessity of his death and resurrection. And finally, we lead up to that fateful moment of his crucifixion. At this point, Mary of Bethany doesn't bother to show up for the crucifixion. She just disappears. Even though she's anointed him for his death, it's not an event she can be bothered to attend. Luckily, as magic would have it, Mary Magdalene, who's been missing for 3 years, immediately reappears. She shows up at the crucifixion, which is a very brave thing to do when you've got a mob screaming to kill someone, and you're there as a second-class citizen, i.e. a woman, saying, I support this guy. Very, very brave thing to do. She attends the burial at the tomb. She brings the spices for the body. She brings the spices from the body from Bethany, where Mary of Bethany lives, but Mary of Bethany apparently doesn't accompany her. She is the one that Jesus appears to first when he's raised. That's interesting from Jesus, isn't it? Jesus apparently had a very close relationship with this Mary here, but the moment he's raised, he doesn't want anything to do with Mary of Bethany anymore. Forget her, I'm back to Mary Magdalene. And it's Mary Magdalene he appears to, and it's Mary Magdalene that he appoints to testify to the apostles that he is risen. Now, I hope you'll agree with me, that story makes no sense. The two best disciples he ever had the same name, and even though he met them in total 10 times, like Clark Kent and Superman, they were never in the same room together. Really? They never met? And they were both dedicated to the same man? This only makes sense if we say, of course, it's one Mary. Mary Magdalene is the sister of Lazarus and Martha. And that now makes sense. And that now allows you to see what an incredible disciple this person is. All the achievements of Mary of Bethany, all the achievements of Mary of Magdalene belong to the same woman, because it is the same woman. It always has been. She is the premier disciple of Jesus Christ. So we can say we've identified Mary, sister of Martha, is one and the same as Mary Magdalene, and we can conclude confidently there are 3 Marys in the gospel record. Still enough to be confusing from time to time, but at least we've identified who's who. There are 3 Marys in total. And there they are. So we're now only focused on the top one. That's where we're going to leave these stories alone, and we're going to focus on Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were there sitting opposite the tomb, and we now know that's a great elevation of Mary Magdalene. She is elevated as first among apostles. She's noted even as senior to the mother of Jesus herself. So then, let's tell Mary's story, because we still have this problem of like, well, wasn't she from two different places? How does she have a history in Bethany and Magdala? And by the way, how is she also both rich and poor at the same time? You haven't exactly resolved that. Let me just run through what I see as the resolution of Mary's story. We're just going to do it in bulletproof fashion very quickly. Mary grew up in Bethany, in the south of the country, in Jerusalem. Her siblings are Martha and Lazarus. I'm going to suggest, well, she grew up in the house of the poor, therefore she is poor. I'm going to suggest, like many women of that time who were poor, she had no opportunity socially and was forced into prostitution in order to make a living. Now, prostitution is a fairly ugly topic, so we'll pass through it as swiftly as we can, but just to note the basics, it's not something you can necessarily easily perform in your own village, because you're known and you know everyone. So it's best to be somewhere anonymous. And where better to go? You need a place where there's money, lots of disposable income so people can indulge themselves who have money. A transient population is good, that's a port, and a place that's known for disposable income and corruption and is also a port with a transient population would be Magdala. Magdala is an intelligent place. Obviously it's not a morally good comment, but it's an intelligent place to go and practice prostitution. There was much prostitution there. I suggest Mary then moved to Magdala for that purpose, to stay alive. It's at Magdala she would obtain money, including lavish gifts. She later is found to have in her possession perfume worth a year's wages. And that's not something that's going to exist in the house of the poor in Bethany. Where did it come from? I'm sorry if it's a distasteful suggestion, but probably in this manner. And then she meets Jesus. Everything changes. I think this has always been a godly spiritual woman. And for a godly spiritual woman to conduct herself in the practice of prostitution, I think would cause her mental torture. We notice that Jesus cast 7 demons or 7 presences of madness out of the mind of Mary Magdalene. My suspicion is this is where they came from. A godly woman forced into this ugly profession, this ugly occupation, would cause her much mental turmoil. So it's there, I think, that Jesus casts out, well, we know it's there Jesus casts out the mental troubles of this godly woman. And at this point, her life is transformed. It's not just no more prostitution. She never wanted that anyway. It's no more anything except Jesus. The effect of Jesus on her puts, may I speak on your behalf, puts all of us to shame. We have met Jesus in some small way, but our lives have never been blown apart like this lady's life was blown apart. She says, that's it, I'm not leaving your side. I'm coming with you. All my money will go to supporting you and enabling your mission to go forward. I've assembled other women who have a similar mindset, and we will facilitate your ministry going forward. From her transformed life now, she returns from Galilee, because Jesus has to come south, with money to support Jesus. Again, here are the references. She brings Jesus to her family in Bethany. That makes sense, right? You notice when Jesus arrives in Jerusalem for the very first time, Jesus hasn't been to Jerusalem before. It says he spoke in the synagogue, and then he left the synagogue and went to his home in Bethany. Well, how did he get that Airbnb fixed up so quickly? Right? But it's Mary Magdalene, isn't it? She's come with him and she's like, don't worry, I've got accommodation sorted. When you finish preaching in the synagogue, I've got a house. Well, it's her family home. You'll be coming with me. So that's why he's so quickly able to just step out of the synagogue and go straight to his home in Bethany as if he'd always been there. She sits at Jesus' feet and humbly listens and learns to everything he says. She shares the tragedy of her brother's death with Jesus. She understands his teaching and anoints him for burial. Oh, that's supposed to be green over there, those references. She bravely attends Jesus' crucifixion and burial. She holds a loyal dear me. She holds a loyal vigil at Jesus' tomb. He's there for 3 days and 3 nights. So she never leaves. and then she's chosen as the first to meet the resurrected Jesus, and she believes immediately. That's her story, and that's how those two Marys resolve very neatly into a single coherent story. Let's now dip into that story and enjoy some of the jewels that we can have. She's the perfect disciple. I speak clumsily in a sense, but I don't apologize for that appellation. She's the perfect disciple in that sense. She that has ears to hear has heard. And I'm just going to put up a comparison. Discipleship is never a competition, but I do want to put up a comparison between the way Mary listens to Jesus and the way the 12 male apostles listened to Jesus. Jesus teaches Mary. Martha had a sister called Mary. She sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. In parallel, Jesus began to show the 12 apostles that he must go to Jerusalem and be killed and on the third day be raised. Same teaching, but it's a different audience. What's the reaction to that? Mary came up to Jesus with an alabaster flask of very expensive ointment, and she poured it on his head. She did it for his burial. How do we know that? Because Jesus tells us, and he tells the people who are watching, if you don't know why she did this, she knows I'm about to die, and that's why she's done this for me. How did the men react? Peter took Jesus aside and began to rebuke him, saying, "Far be it from you, Lord. This shall never happen to you." Now we know Peter is not a wicked man, but Peter is still a man. And the male prerogative is to say, I think I already understand the universe. If I receive new information, I must fit it within the construct I already have. So he knows he understands the universe. Now he thinks he does. I know I'm Peter. I'm a loyal man. I'm a fisherman. I'm a reasonably physically strong man. This magnificent man, Jesus, inspires me. And he says there's people out trying to kill him. Ha ha, no problem. Me and my biceps will ensure this does not come about. This poor little man is saying that he's going to be taken over. Not a chance. Let me pull him to one side, little weedy little man that he is, and tell him, no, I got you covered. I'm your man. And that's a very male way to respond. In other words, not listening. And so Jesus says to Mary, Mary has chosen the good portion, Martha, to sit and listen to me. We will not take this away from her. In pouring this ointment on my body, she has shown that she understands my coming death and burial. And to Peter, of course, Jesus had to say, you're a hindrance to me, Peter. You're not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man. And these are the very best of the men that he could have around him. Even John confesses, they, meaning we, good choice of pronoun there, John, we still did not understand from Scripture that Jesus had to rise from the dead, even though he told them in explicit words, I'm going to die and rise from the dead. We had no idea he was going to die and rise from the dead. You see, the men aren't listening properly. But one disciple is. Her name is Mary. Mary listened and learned. That's nice. I don't know why that graph's there, but enjoy it. Yes. Why is that there? Oh, that's right. It's such a journey of discovery, this, isn't it? So much fun when you don't use notes and you just look at something and you think, I have no idea what that is. You might say, well, why is she called different names? Because she does call different names. She started off calling Mary Magdalene. Perfectly logical, because she's in Magdala. Then when she comes home to her home in Bethany and is amongst her siblings, the Bible tends to reference her as the sister of Martha and Lazarus. This also makes sense, right? Because now she's back at home with the family. She's Mary, part of that family. The family weren't there in Magdala. So these two different names both make sense. What comes as a bit of a surprise is that at the very end, when you want to see the true Mary, she goes back to being called, or rather God, the narrator of the Bible, goes back to calling her Mary of Magdala. And you think, well, that's a bit unfortunate. Considering her practice in Magdala was there for prostitution, it's a bit, do we really have to rake that up again? Do we have to end up calling her Mary Magdalene? Yes. Why? because that's actually the more beautiful name. Mary of Bethany chose or was forced to go to Magdala and earn money in the only way she could. Mary of Bethany chose prostitution. But Mary of Magdalene, trapped in prostitution, chose Christ. This is the one who chose Christ. I believe that's why her name goes back to what is actually the more beautiful of the two names. So that's because we hadn't resolved, if it's one person, why do we have these two different references as the Bible proceeds? And I think that's why we see it the way that we do. I said earlier that when that shortest verse of the Bible we all know so well, John chapter 11, verse 35, Jesus wept. Let's look at that and see the role that Mary plays here. Where have you laid Lazarus? Says Jesus after he's come back to Bethany to see him. Come and see, Lord, they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him, meaning Lazarus. See how he loved Lazarus. Why did Jesus weep? And if you're just reading the Bible, it says, well, it kind of says so. It's because he loved Lazarus. But it doesn't say that. It doesn't say he wept because he loved Lazarus. It says the Jews around him said, oh, the reason he's weeping is because he loved Lazarus. And the problem with the Jews around Jesus saying this is why he said this and this is why he did this is that they tend to be wrong about 100% of the time. And so the fact that the Jews say that's why he's wept is no good reason. Was Jesus' death the cause of Jesus' weeping? No, because Lazarus has been dead for 4 days and Jesus is known for 4 days. Jesus was the one who told the apostles, as Lazarus has fallen asleep. And the men, who are not listening as usual, say, oh great, he'll be well rested. And Jesus has to say, no, he's dead. And he doesn't cry. And then he comes back to the home village of Bethany, and he sees all the sights, the smells, the sounds, and he doesn't cry. And then he meets Martha, and Martha says to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother had not have died. And he doesn't cry. So what was new? What triggered him to cry? It's the context. But it's not the verse afterwards. It's the verse before. There it is. When Jesus saw Mary weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. It was when he saw Mary cry, when he saw her pain, even though he knew about the resurrection of Lazarus, even though Mary did, and so did Martha, it was seeing Mary in pain that caused Jesus to weep. That's how much this disciple was loved by Jesus. It was the empathy. So when the Jews wrongly said, see how he loved Lazarus, what they should have said, if they were more observant, was, see how he loves Mary. It was because he loved Mary that he cried. The evidence is on the screen. Then there's the anointing. The anointing is written in 3 different Gospels. There's a lot of information on that table, and I don't need you to take it all in. All I'm trying to show you is that these 3 accounts are telling the same story. The reason I bother to say that is because it's commonly believed that one of them is telling a different story, and therefore this anointing happened twice. The only reason that people take one of these, and I've genuinely forgotten which one, and say it's a different event, is they're trying to put together a chronology of the ministry. Trying to build a linear chronology in any biblical book is fraught with difficulty and usually a bad idea. Okay? It's quite clear from the details, this event took place in Simon's house, says Luke and Matthew, which is in Bethany, says Matthew and John, involving an alabaster jar of very expensive perfumes, say they all. Jesus' feet and or head, probably both, was anointed, and Mary wiped the feet with her hair. It's only John who tells us it's Mary, and so people try and say it might be a different woman doing the same exact thing in other places, but all I'm saying is, look at this, it's the same story told 3 times. We match the details to have the confidence that it is the same. Sorry about that. We match the details to have the confidence that there are three versions of the same story. Why are we doing that? Because there's something kind of hidden in this story which is rather beautiful, and I want to show it to you. And it comes out of looking at the unique details. These are the unique details of each of the accounts. Luke tells us Simon's a Pharisee. Matthew tells us Simon's a leper. Both are true, no doubt. And John tells us the woman is Mary. So if this makes sense to me, why would a Pharisee be living in the house of the poor, be living in Bethany? Well, if he has leprosy, or even if it's now the sort of dry leprosy that's non-contagious, you can understand why that would be the case. Simon is the one who issues the invite to Jesus, which implies it's his house, which I believe, which actually means Mary doesn't live there, right? Simon disapproves of Mary's arrival, but he kind of feels he has to let her in. Mary is named as a sinner, and the expensive ointment belongs to Mary. Martha is serving the meal, which implies it's her house, which I also believe. In short, I'm going to suggest to you that Simon the leprous Pharisee has married Martha. This is their house. It's Simon's house, he issues the invite. It's Martha's house, she's cooking the food. And it's in Bethany. Why would a Pharisee be in Bethany? Because he's a leper, so he isn't going to live in the nicer parts of the city. You can see Simon doesn't want to let Mary in, but now you know why he has to. This is my sister-in-law. I don't want her here because I disapprove of her former lifestyle, and I'm a bit judgmental like that. That's why I fit in so well as a Pharisee. But if I don't let my sister-in-law, I'm sleeping on the couch for the next 6 months, so I guess she can come in. And that's how this works. So I suggest to you it all fits together if you have that Simon and Martha are married and their house is in Bethany. We know that the reason Martha's hosting this dinner in the first place is because this is her thank you for the resurrection of Lazarus. Dinner might not seem thanks enough, but it's all she could do, and that this is her way to honor Jesus for the wonderful thing that he's done. Jesus has raised Lazarus. This dinner is Martha's way to honor him. But if Mary doesn't live there, and Mary has uses this expensive ointment, it means that Mary too had a plan. What I'm building to is when she anoints Jesus with this ointment, that wasn't an idea she had in the moment. She's brought the ointment with her. She planned to do this. Just like Martha planned the dinner, Mary has planned the anointment. The ointment is hers, so she's brought it over to her sister's house. Mary has planned this, and in that sense, she honors Jesus far more deeply even than Martha has. Martha has honored Jesus in a very secular way with a dinner of honor, but Mary has thought of something far deeper and more spiritual with which to honor her Lord. Let's have a look then just at the last few closing days, the crucifixion and the resurrection. And putting all those stories together from the Gospels isn't easy, but on the day before Passover, of course, that's the crucifixion. And this is just a list of the people who were there. You don't need to read all of that necessarily. And then at the burial, this is the list of the people who were there at the tomb. And then on the Sunday morning, visits to the tomb. It's kind of hard to make one story out of the Gospels, but it looks like there were 2 visits to the tomb. The first visit, here are the people who are there. And the second visit with Peter and John, here are the people who are there. Lots and lots of names all over that slide. You don't have to read it all. What do I want you to notice? I want you to notice that Mary Magdalene is in every single group. Mary's at the crucifixion, Mary's at the burial, Mary's at tomb visit 1, and Mary is at tomb visit 2. Mary Magdalene is there all of the time, and she's the only one who's there all of the time. So she's the only person who makes all 4 lists. So I'm just showing you how attached Mary is to Jesus, both in life and death. She's the one who's always there. And this is beginning to build to spiritual exhortation for ourselves, the one who's always there. I love this. I think the Bible makes a big deal out of this. It's written very quietly, as God usually speaks, but looking at the loyalty of the vigil that Mary holds. Look at this. Look at the words in red and blue. Joseph of Arimathea rolled a big stone in front of the entrance to the tomb, and he and Nicodemus, after doing this, went away. But Mary Magdalene and Jesus' mother were sitting there opposite the tomb. The two men come, the two men go. The two women come, the two women stay. Is that a big deal? I mean, you might say you're reading too much into one little verse, but it comes up again and again. Look, Peter and John started out for the tomb. Then the disciples went back to where they were staying, but Mary stood outside the tomb crying. Peter and John came. Peter and John went away. Mary came because she brought them. Mary stayed. In fact, the only reason she ever left the tomb was when the angel told her, go get Peter and John. She went and got them, came back and stayed. Peter, however, got up and ran to the tomb. Bending over, he saw the strips of linen lying by themselves, and he went away, wondering to himself, what has happened? Joseph and Nicodemus came and went. Mary stayed. Peter and John came and went. Mary stayed. Jesus revealed himself to the one who stayed. And maybe that's still true today. Do you want to see Jesus? Then stay. With your relationship with Jesus, don't come and go. Stay. Remain with him, and Jesus will reveal himself to you. This is our final part, the actual revelation of Jesus himself. Jesus asked Mary, woman, why are you crying? Who is it you are looking for? Thinking he was the gardener, she said, sir, if you've carried him away, tell me where you've put him, and I will get him. Because she only left the tomb for a minute. She had to go at the angel's command and go fetch Peter and John, and by the time she comes back, the body's gone. And she's been there for 3 days and 3 nights. Brothers and sisters, ask yourself, why was she there the whole time? Oh, it's emotional connection. No. Why was she there the whole time? Because she believed. Jesus had said, 3 days, 3 nights, I'll rise. And she's like, I'm waiting. I'm not going to move. I'm going to be here the moment he comes. She was the only one who believed. None of the male apostles believed at this stage. They thought Jesus had been lost. One human on planet Earth believed the gospel message. How terrible are we as a species? One. Well, thank God for that one. Thank God for Mary Magdalene. She stayed there the whole time, but by the time she comes back with Peter and John, disaster has struck, the body's been moved. Peter and John have left, Jesus reveals himself. Yes, because realize, Peter, John, and Mary are there. Speaking as a human, that's the right time to reveal yourself, Jesus. Obviously, right? By the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses will a matter be established. That's the law. There's 3 of them. And they can all go back and preach the same message, and they can corroborate each other's story. Makes much more sense to reveal yourself to 3 rather than 1. But Jesus says no. Mary alone has earned this. These men, they don't listen. These men, they are good men, and they will be pillars in my church. But for now, they don't listen. They come and they go. This prize of revelation is for one alone, the one who never left me. So he waits for Peter and John to go and reveals himself to Mary alone. She's shown to be above Peter and John in that context. Again, discipleship is no competition. I just notice the ranking that we see. Jesus said to her, Mary. One word, her name, and she knows it all. The teacher of teachers recognizes the student of students. It's a beautiful scene. It's even prophesied, look. He calls his own sheep by name, and the sheep listen to his voice. Mary, her name. She knows it all. Nothing more needs to be said. Mary has only to hear her name. She knows who, she knows how. She knows it all. No more is said. And so Jesus appoints her as the apostle to the apostles. What do I mean by that? The apostle is someone carrying the message, Jesus is raised. That's my definition. If you like it, you can use it. I think that's the most meaningful. So she says, go to my brothers, go back to the men and tell them, I am raised. I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God. Mary is ordained in that sense as the apostle to the apostles. And I'm being kind to the men because they don't yet believe. But they are the ones who will become the apostles, and Mary is the apostle first. She is the one who will carry the message they need to hear. Our last slide then for this school. Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, I have seen the Lord. But they did not believe it. Seemed to them like nonsense. The men aren't listening again. And so the message is ignored. And for a while, therefore, until the new church is established, after Jesus has ascended, the gospel message, like a tiny little Olympic torch, is carried by one human alone. The only one who's carrying the gospel message. Jesus is risen. The only one who believes it at this time. It's just in one little human heart. The human heart of Mary. Jesus said to her, Mary. And she alone carried that message until the men were ready to listen, until the men were ready to believe. In this sense, then, chronologically and in so many other senses, truly, Mary is first among apostles. It's a magnificent character that we have the privilege to see. And I'm thankful that I think the whole school has done a Mary and stayed, not come and went. And you're all here, as it seems as full as it was on the first day, to see the one who stayed and the one who was rewarded so richly for her faith. Thank you.
Here we all thank Brother John for his classes this week, and one thing I've really been impressed with is how important sometimes one word can be in opening up the true meaning of a piece of Scripture. It's 9:47, Be back in your seats about a minute before 10. I can tell time.